Welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast. I'm your host, Byron Pace. It is the 19th of October, 2020. Today I'm going to be speaking to Lindsey Davis. She is a columnist for Modern Huntsman, also a board member of the Outdoor Alliance, which you're going to be hearing far more about, as well as an ambassador for Mystery Ranch. The variety of topics we cover today is insane. Everything from ecology and permaculture to running a small business, the impact of people in the environment, the Great American Outdoors Act. She talks about her testifying in Congress, being a naturalist, her transformation from eating roadkill to being a hunter, and the importance of indigenous management. And that is probably about 20% of what we cover in this show. But before we get to that, a massive shout out to all of our Patreon supporters who help make this show possible. And in the top tier this week, we have Richard Stevens, Richard McNeil, Ronnie Speakman of rdcontracting.co.uk, Tom McCraith, James Benjamin Normandale, James Marchington, the guys at South Esher Stalking, Josh Starling, Thomas Cameron, and Mark Zabrowski. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you very much for the support of every single one of the Patreons that are there. If you want to check that page out, it's patreon.com/Byron Pace. You can have a look at the different tiers and how you can help support the podcast. We ran a competition 2 weeks ago, as we always do with our partners, Modern Huntsman, to win a copy of Volume 3. And all I asked you to do was rate or review the podcast. And a load of you did. So thank you so much, because not only was it a way for you to enter the competition, it really helps in getting this show picked up and seen by lots of other people on Apple Podcast or not so much Spotify, because they don't really have a rate or review system, but all the other platforms. It means that it becomes a recommended show more often if it has more ratings and more reviews. So anyway, picking a review totally at random, I scrolled down. Let me just scroll down the list here and randomly stop somewhere from all of the new ratings and reviews. And I've stopped on Tristan Stock, who commented on Apple Podcasts, who said, "A great podcast giving an amazing, unbiased, balanced, and educated view on the wilderness here at home in the UK and abroad. Thank you very much. Contact the show. Shoot me an email, podcast@paceproductionsuk.com, and I will get Volume 3 out to you." Now, I'm pressing pause on the competitions for this week because our partners, Modern Huntsman, I have just launched the most incredible photography competition. And so what I'm going to do is, for the next 14 and a half minutes, you're going to hear from Tyler Sharp and Tito West from Modern Huntsman, who are going to tell you all about this photo competition, why they've launched it, why it's important, what they hope to achieve with it, how you can enter it. And then we're going to skip over to my conversation with Lindsey. Tyler, Tito, welcome back to the Into the Wilderness podcast. Now, you guys are not on for very long. We've got a short intro here, but it's a really important one. I mentioned a couple of days ago on the show that went out to give people a bit of an update about new timings with the podcast. But importantly, I put that out because I wanted to give people a heads up about this incredible photo competition that is running through Modern Huntsman and doesn't actually have that many days left from when this podcast goes out. So, Mr. Sharp, photo competition. There's a lot of photo competitions out there. Why is Modern Huntsman launching a photo competition now?
Sure. Well, just to specify, it's not just a photo competition, because we also have a fine art category for illustration and painting and mixed media. But to add to that, right, as you know, Byron, and as many of your listeners probably know, we've always tried to find new perspectives and publish people who maybe hadn't had the spotlight before. And we've always talked about that. And this was a way, especially, with conversations around wanting to have more perspectives and more diversity in the outdoor and hunting industries. This is kind of us putting out a call to see more work from different people, different backgrounds, different countries, different industries. Maybe they're fine artists, maybe they're studio artists. And we've managed to assemble a really impressive list of judges, all just amazing people, almost none of which are from the hunting industry, who have all offered their time to review work. And different from other competitions, we're actually giving paid assignments. So the winner of each of the 8 categories will get a paid assignment. We'll publish them as an artist feature on our site. They're going to get feedback from some of these industry professionals. I mean, we've got former creative director of National Geographic, director of photography for Patagonia, editorial director of Nike, photo director of Red Bull, faculty director of the Art Center in Pasadena, Mystery Ranches, marketing director. I'm still drinking coffee, so it hasn't quite kicked in. Chris Burkhardt, who was our photographer, our cover image on Volume 2, and then marketing director from First Light. So apart from paid work and feedback portfolio reviews from professionals, we're doing introductions to brands. So in terms of all of us thinking back as freelancers, what was an amazing opportunity that we would have loved to have taken? This is something we built to try to beat that. So
it's incredible. And it's just to emphasize something that you mentioned. This is Modern Huntsman's call to bring new people into the space. This is for everyone. This is a call out to say we want to see work from everyone, from every walk of life, from every corner of the planet.
Yes, and not necessarily just new work, right? That doesn't. We don't want to rule anybody out. Anyone we've worked with before, we'd like to see more of their work. We want to see people from other industries, people who aren't hunters, maybe who are just starting as a photographer. But yes, and we called it Field Outrider, which is kind of a fancy word for scout. It was a word they used in the American West. Outrider was somebody who would basically go out and scout the territory to make sure that there weren't any imminent dangers or any of that sort of thing. So that's kind of the idea here. We're always looking for new work. And so this is kind of our way to do that.
Tito, tell me a little bit about what, I know this is going to come down to a collaborative discussion with the judges, but in terms of when yourself and Tyler and the rest of the team are putting this together and creating this vision for the kind of work and the bar that you want to set with this, what are you looking for?
It's hard to say. I think obviously we're looking for quality work, but I really think we're looking for diverse perspectives, people who are doing something different, and not just different, but I think people who are shooting stuff that's very close to them so that the work comes across with some meaning. I think there's so many talented individuals out there shooting photos these days that we're less interested in finding someone who can just shoot anything and everything. We want somebody who is drawn to a certain subject because they have some sort of a tie to it. And I think that comes across in the work and actually elevates it to a level, more than if they're just a good technical photographer.
Yeah, because there's a big difference between being technically perfect and being able to tell a story with an image.
Absolutely. I think it's easier now than ever to take a technically perfect photograph. That's like kind of the entry level thing. What we want to see after that is your ability to convey emotion and meaning through a photograph.
I was just going to say, just to add to what Tito and I have had a lot of conversations about what Tito's kind of ultimate vision is for, what he wants Modern Huntsman to be perceived at in the photography community. And whether that's somebody who's established or whether that's somebody that we help discover and uplift and work with. So why don't you tell them a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two different camps of photography. There's like the actual photography world with fashion and kind of more photojournalism. And then you kind of have outdoor photography over in its own space. And the two have never blended very well. I think that barrier is starting to remove a little bit. But our goal is to kind of have, outdoor photography taken very seriously by the photo world. And I think the fact that we have the judges that we do shows that we're already moving in that direction. So now it's about finding people that can kind of lead that charge. And especially on the emerging side, it's one of the hardest industries to break into. And, people really need a connection. And that's what we're doing is we're kind of shortening the time span and putting them in front of people that they may otherwise really never have an opportunity to meet. So I think there's value even for people that enter the competition and maybe don't go on to win it, since there can only be one winner for each category. Their work is still going to be seen and going to be reviewed by these judges. And I think a lot of work is going to stick out in the judges' mind, and they're going to remember it and they will go back to it. So I think it's a really interesting thing that we're doing. And it's just the first step in like a huge evolution that we want to do in terms of making a contribution to the photography world.
Yeah, because, since the very inception of Modern Huntsman as a publication, along with the actual content, the words and the meaning of the words and the stories that are being told, it has been seen from the very start as a publication that has kind of set the bar in the outdoor space for using photography as an art form to complement the words that are that are written on the pages. So I suppose that this is an extension of that, and it's trying to open that a bit more and pull more people into that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think the photos definitely do complement the words in the publication a lot. But there's several times where we want the photos to tell their own version of their story, or for it to be a separate medium that conveys emotion in another way that's not just illustration of the words. So photography tells its own story. And even going into this next volume, we're leaning on some very photographic heavy stories with minimal or sometimes no words. So I think photography has been at the forefront of what Tyler has been wanting to do with Modern Huntsman ever since the beginning. And, this is no different, and we're going to lean into it. And, eventually we'll probably do something similar with writing, but photography is kind of the cornerstone of what everything is based on right now. And we're going to really push into this space.
Yeah. And Byron, it's also another way for us to try to bring some sort of help to artists and freelancers and photographers and artists who just maybe don't have work, because there's really not a lot of people handing out assignments. And so this is a way for us to do what we can, even though it's a minor gesture, to get people working.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. There is almost no work out there at the moment, especially in the writing and photography space. Tyler, just as a way to kind of wrap this up and bring it to a conclusion, tell me about the categories. You've mentioned a couple of them already. What are the categories that people can enter into?
Sure. So in no particular order, but we have a wildlife category, obviously based around animals and things like that. And we wanted to make sure that not all of these were related specifically to hunting. We have a wild places that is more focused on the environment. It could be interpreted literally as a landscape, but also just atmospheric, right?
Culture,
environments. We have a Western category. So obviously that's limited to kind of the spirit of the West. Doesn't necessarily have to be in the United States, because there's Western culture in Argentina and, gaucho culture and things like that. We have a harvest category, which could be interpreted literally as, wild game, but really that's kind of a culinary category.
Yeah.
That could be food, that could be wine, that could be foraging, mushrooms, fruit, whatever that is. Let's see, we have an artist category. So that's, painters, illustrations, artists. We have an emerging category, and that's basically either student work or somebody who, ideally has less than 2 years of professional experience. We have a pursuit category that's more related specifically to hunting, right? And that is, we've always talked about, not just the hunt shouldn't just be about whether or not you kill something, or that whether or not you come home successfully with an animal or whatever you're pursuing, whether that's fish or deer. And then, so this is more about the journey of actually being out in the field, whether that's fishing, whether that's hunting, just tracking. It could be, bird watching,
whatever
anything
the
like that.
pursuit is to you.
Yeah, whatever the pursuit is. And then we have a portraiture category. So that's obviously a pretty wide range of subject matter. Doesn't have to be related to hunting, but I think that's something that Tito, has a lot more experience in, and the power of an image of a person to tell a story, whether that's a close up on their face with the lines and the emotion in their eyes, or that's more of a environmental portrait that shows the environment and location they're in. But yeah, those are the 8 categories. And, we intentionally picked a wide enough range to allow people who aren't specifically from this industry to participate. But at the same time, anyone who's in the outdoor hunting, angling world can still submit relevant work.
It's a very exciting prospect. And the prizes are insane. I've not really seen prizes like that in the photography competition game. And I'm just jealous that I can't enter because I know you guys are involved in Modern Huntsman. That's the only negative I see of this competition, is that I'm not allowed to enter. Although I imagine we're going to have some incredible entries, and I'm so excited to lay my eyes on the imagery that comes through for each category.
You could enter, and then if you win, that's a chance for you to show how noble you are, and you could denounce your prize for the next runner-up.
That's really good. Look, it's an incredible initiative, especially now, at this time that we're living in right now. Like you highlighted, Tyler, it's been very difficult, especially for writers and especially for photographers and freelancers and all walks of life, because we've all been sat at home and we all rely normally on work, traveling around and telling other people's stories, which has been very, very difficult right now. So to have this opportunity and be able to showcase work in front of an incredible array of judges, as well as the team at Modern Huntsman, is an amazing opportunity. So if people want to find out more and they want to enter this, where do they head?
So that's at modernhuntsman.com/field-outrider.
Yeah.
If you go to the Modern Huntsman website, it's on the homepage. If you go to our Instagram profile and you click the link in the bio, there's a link to submit. And just one final parting point to make. We've had a lot of people say that they feel intimidated by the judges because they are, very accomplished, successful, influential people. But I had a call with all eight of them the other day, and they could not be more excited and anxious to see more work. So if there was one thing I would just relay to anyone listening who would consider sending something, it would be to just do it, because everybody, this is a greater good. Everybody really wants to give back, and these are all people who are thinking back to when they were just starting their careers, and they really want to just help lift people up and do something good and give back a little bit. So send us your work.
Gents, thank you very much for your time today. I'm looking forward to getting this out to everybody and seeing the. So actually, Tyler, before I do let you go, when do people have to submit this by? Because that's important. When's the deadline?
Sure. As of right now, it's Sunday, October 25th. I think that's the 25th. Yes. Sunday, October 25th. And then basically, because the winners will be published in volume 6. So we have to, be able to judge this in time and select the winners and then actually get it into design and layout. So lots
so
of
get
stake
going.
here.
When you listen to this podcast, get going. Get your pictures together, get them submitted.
Yep.
Thanks very much, gents. I will speak to you both soon.
Cheers, Brian.
Thank you.
I'm excited actually to have the opportunity to have a long form conversation with you, because I remember last time we spoke and it was only going to be an intro to another show, and I was like, I want to speak to you for longer. This isn't fair.
I know, we really made the most of our 10 minutes.
We did. Well, I'm gonna kick right off here. So, Lindsey, welcome to the show. Welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast. It's awesome to have you on. We spoke on the podcast very briefly. I can't even remember when it was. I mean, it could have been 2 years ago, I think, as a little bit of an introduction prior to a main conversation with whoever the other guest was on that particular show. And you were talking about one of your contributions to Modern Huntsman. But I have seen you much more recently than that. It's hard to believe that it was actually the start of this year, because it feels like 3 or 4 years ago already, because so much has happened this year, and yet so little has happened this year, because 2020 is very weird in that way. But how have you been since I saw you in, where were we, Dallas, Texas?
Yeah, we were in Dallas. I actually can't believe that was the same year. That does feel like at least 2 years ago, Byron, but how fun was that?
That was a lot of fun. Yeah, it was. We were at it was Dallas Safari Club, and we were like a journalist, it wasn't just journalists, but I think they called it a journalist symposium, and we were discussing the future of conservation and the role that hunting plays in that. And that was the first time you'd been a part of one of those, was it, Lindsey?
Yeah, it was very, very interesting. It was kind of a closed-door small group session all day with different hunters and non-hunters and conservationists from around the world. And we just sat there toiling over our experiences and trying to figure out what role communication has in the future of hunting and how all of these different wildlife management models are going to be sustained.
Yeah, no, it was a lot of fun. We had some incredible people around the table and some fascinating discussions. I always leave those kind of chats, you're in awe of the knowledge of the people in the room.
Yeah, me too. I mean, it was the part that was so impactful for me is the first time I was around really a global perspective of hunting rather than, the North American wildlife model. So I learned so much from you and Jack and the other folks that were in attendance.
Who knows if that's even going to happen? I mean, there was supposed to be a kind of an equivalent one to that particular event. I think it was supposed to be August this year, but quite obviously that never happened. And I would imagine that they'd loosely planned to do the same thing at Dallas Safari Club again in February. But who knows if any of those shows are going to happen this year? Oh, sorry, not this year, next year.
Yeah, there's a couple. They're starting to pop up. I've heard that SHOT Show is happening.
Okay.
The Western Hunting Show here in Salt Lake City, Utah, where I'm based, is happening. So they're popping up, but I would say 90% of trade shows are canceled through next year.
You're in Utah now. Where? When we have, I think half of the listeners for the podcast pretty much are Americans, from the USA, so they will know where Utah is. But for all the rest of the listeners, where in the US is Utah situated?
So Utah's in the Rocky Mountain West. It's part of the Colorado Plateau, and it is below Idaho, next to Colorado. Really beautiful, complex place with a rich history and strange religion and a high percentage of public lands and a really dynamic landscape of big mountains and vast swaths of desert and desert ranges and of course expansive red rock landscape.
Yeah, that's what I picture, that red rock landscape when I think of Utah, but I've never been.
Oh, you have to come visit, Byron.
I would love to. I'd love to. At the moment, I'm not allowed into the US. Well, not if I come straight from the UK, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I'm still working on a solution to that. Let's rewind a little bit, Lindsey, because I got introduced to you through Modern Huntsman. When we had that first conversation on the podcast, I read your stuff or some of your contributions a year before. But I really don't know very much about your backstory. We sat together at dinner at that event at Dallas, and we had a great chat that evening. But it was about current things that were going on in our lives at the time. So I never really got a chance to dig into how you came to hunt with a bow, how you came to write a contribution to Modern Huntsman, how you linked up with Tyler. None of that. So but take me right back. What was it like for you growing up? Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Colorado mostly, but moved a lot as a kid. So bounced back and forth between California and Colorado a lot. But very fortunate to have grown up in a camping, fishing, outdoor family, although no one in my family hunts. And I'm still the only person that does. Well, yeah, it's interesting. It's a big kind of surprise for everybody. I definitely had like a long relationship of exposure to the outdoors, and then, with the typical sort of camping, hiking, climbing activities throughout my teens. And then when I was in my 20s, I started learning a lot about I studied international development and sustainable development and worked a lot with communities internationally for kind of developing regional resiliency in their food systems or in their housing or water systems, stuff like that. And it got me really into permaculture, which is this design methodology for living within ecological systems. And then I started doing that work in the Mountain West, kind of in my mid-20s, learned how to farm, was working on a lot of kind of several 100-acre sites where we were using all on-site resources to build the structures there and move water throughout the landscape and plant food forests and stuff like that. So really cool. Got kind of way into food.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I love that.
It was such an awesome chapter. I made no money for like 10 years, but.
So what was the organization you were working for?
Oh, there were so many. So there was a lot. Kind of what got me into it was I did this field studies program in college that doesn't exist anymore, sadly, but it's called the Sierra Institute. And you spend 2 months backpacking and learning about permaculture in the course that I took. And then I started teaching for them. So it was such a cool blend of things that I loved, which were, being outside, going on like extended backcountry adventures, but then also learning about deep ecology and how to have like a very involved relationship with the place that you live, and learn to live from the landscape that's around you. So, and then I just sort of bounced around from different permaculture institutions throughout the West, either teaching or living there. And then, of course, they're all nonprofits, and I had a development background, so it was a good way for me to make a living being either a grant writer or program developer, stuff like that.
So I know you gave us a very brief overview of it, but just unpack permaculture a little bit, because a lot of people, that might very well be the first time they've ever heard of this. It sounds to me like it's very much about sustainable living and use of resources on the land.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, people sort of say permaculture is a relatively new idea based on thousands of year old concepts, like how indigenous people lived and stuff like that. But there's a couple key figures in the 70s who coined that term permaculture and started writing books about it, so they get the credit. It's a way to live within your ecology, basically. And that can mean a number of things, but a lot of it is designed around small scale home and agricultural systems. And so you take into consideration, like if you're going to build a house, there's all sorts of design methodologies for doing assessments in your area. So you'd want to know where the prevailing winds are, how does the sun cycle around the landscape? How does water flow through it throughout the year? How do you use all of that natural energy that's there to get the most passive solar gain, heating and cooling out of your house? So it would teach you and coach you through like exactly where you should put your house and how you should build it and where the windows would be in order to have the most efficient home structure. So stuff like that. And you can apply it to pretty much everything. So the same would go for your food system, your gardens, how you're going to grow anything on the landscape. It's really optimizing the aspect, the available resources, the natural benefits of the climate, and using them to your advantage.
That's brilliant. I mean, those are all the things that we are going to have to consider going forward if we want to live more sympathetically on the planet. I mean, just when you're talking about house building there, I know, because we've got a friend building a house not too far from where my parents live right now. And actually, I helped my dad build the house that my parents live in. And so much of the regulations are around, understandably, about like the efficiency of homes. So that's like the insulation within them, or like offsetting energy usage through using solar panels or air source heating. But as far as I know, certainly here anyway, there's no stipulation that says, well, you need to make sure there's so many windows facing a certain direction so that you're maximizing the heat transfer from the sun into your house. I don't think that exists, but really it's wasteful not to.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a structure for it with LEED certifications in buildings, which is, I don't know if I think that's an international thing. It's definitely a North America thing. But yeah, it's not so specific that but it's more about sort of the overall health of a building that's going up. So there's kind of cool stuff. It's kind of like a biodynamic farm. You think about all these different inputs and try and optimize the whole system rather than just say the organic tomato that comes out. But you're right that it's definitely not a widespread way of thinking. And for how many rules there are in building a house, you'd think we could innovate a little bit on some of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So so you did that for, you said, a decade. What pulled you out of that?
So
to do whatever it was you did next?
Yeah, so I ended up getting an itch for entrepreneurship, and I kind of went through a big life change that was one of those very rare moments in adult life where you all of a sudden have a lot of open road in front of you. I had land and a partner and a job that I no longer wanted to have anymore. So I met another friend and we ended up starting a business in the outdoor industry, which was an online retailer for women. Super cool. We were the first and only women specific retailer. And I got really interested in it because when I started to do kind of the R&D around the concept, at the time, there was very few brands that were focusing on sustainability and kind of materials innovation, and there were also very few brands that were working with nonprofits in the conservation space. And I thought that was just a glaring gap because you have all these outdoor recreation businesses that are completely dependent on healthy ecosystems and places to go.
I try and explain this to some of the big companies in the outdoor space all the time. When I happen to be at events or whatever, and I'm sitting around dinner or, however those conversations may be, very often with people very high up in these companies. And to try and just explain this very basic concept that is, if you do not help protect, say it's within the hunting industry, that's quite a good example. If you are not interested in protecting or preserving hunting as an outdoor recreation and an activity that people will do in the future, you will have no business. And in the same respect, if we're not protecting the environment that we enjoy using and utilize as part of outdoor activities, those activities will also cease to exist, and so these businesses will no longer function. But to explain this concept, and I think the issue lies when I've had these conversations, the issue is definitely is because the time frame that you have to consider this over is so long. It's beyond where the immediate concern of most of the people running those companies is. Yeah.
Well, I like to explain it as, public lands and waters are our core infrastructure. And in the case of hunting and fishing, it's wildlife. And I think people are starting to get it, but you're right that it's a relatively new understanding. I think hunters have been aware of it for at least a little bit longer, but we can definitely be blamed for taking our availability of land and places to explore for granted.
Yeah, for granted. So, when you set up that company, what was your interaction with those kinds of organizations that were concerned about protection of the environment and sustainable resources?
Well, it was interesting because at the time when we started the company, the outdoor industry hadn't even turned its attention to women yet. So, and that was.
Is that when they were just starting to print pink camo?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which I mean,
that was the nod to women in the outdoor space in hunting was, hang on, let's just remake the clothes that we make for dudes, but we'll put some pink lines on it, and then that basically means that it's good for women.
They'll buy it. Yeah, it's so tragic. But yeah, and now you look at the industry, and we are having really complex conversations around indigenous people of color, all of the different racial justice and inequality issues that are so prevalent this year, especially. So there has just been so much that has happened. And of course, in that same time gap, you have a vast awareness around public lands and the public land crisis here in the U.S. and the different politics at play. And, we really saw some brands step up and acknowledge that that was not okay. And so I think there's been a huge, of course, there's many, many miles to go, but I'm amazed when I look back at that timestamp at how much has been accomplished. So I think we're on the right track. And there's also kind of in that same mix, only 3-4 years ago did we first get real numbers out of the Bureau of Economic Analysis about outdoor recreation in the U.S. And it was the first time that they measured it and separated it into its own category for its contribution to the gross domestic product. And what they found was that we were 2.2% of GDP, which is huge. It's
huge.
More than oil and gas, more than computers, And so we also were very emboldened as an industry by that initial research to say, hey, it actually really does matter as an industry and an economic driver when we say you need to protect our core infrastructure in public lands and waters.
Mm. And that's all outdoor industries.
Yeah, exactly.
That's just made me think of something which I think we touched on, or possibly you brought up, or maybe it was Jess that brought it up at that meeting in February, was this idea of a backpack tax be then put into the conservation and protection of these public resources in the great outdoors. Just expand on that a little bit. And has it happened? I've had my finger slightly off the pulse with that.
It hasn't happened. So it's a very hot topic, one that has died down a little bit this year because the tariffs of the recent administration have been so high and of course businesses have struggled so much this year that any additional taxes or tariffs would severely cripple the outdoor industry at this point in time. So that hasn't happened, but the sort of thesis or the meaning behind it is that many of the other recreation activities like hunting, like fishing, like boating, like RVing, they all have some type of use tax or excise tax that goes into funding conservation and wildlife and habitat. So the outdoor industry, as we think of it as the skiers, the climbers, the hikers, to this day don't have anything like that. And so it's one of the issues that I think is really preventing us from having a more unified voice when it comes to uniting all types of recreationalists, because many of the other groups are paying into these taxes and programs, and some just aren't. So a hot topic. It's actually one that I'm going to be taking up here very soon in my next column for Modern Huntsman, is kind of the current landscape for public lands funding and the future of it.
Oh, interesting. And when you say column, we'll maybe save this for later on in the discussion, but when you say column, you're talking about your online contribution?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, right. We're definitely going to pick that up. Make sure I don't forget. Yeah, it's an interesting one because I've talked about this before, or I've written about it before, and for so many people that I've had this conversation with who are maybe not involved in activities that have the opportunity or a system in place for you to pay in to the conservation and protection of the environment that you're utilizing, most of the people I've had conversations with are very willing to, but those systems as it stand do not exist. If I think about here at home, I mean, we don't, unless you're a member of a conservation organization, I mean, even the shooting, pro hunting organizations in the UK, the only one that is really funneling money into proper scientific research and conservation is GWCT. As far as I know, I'm happy for somebody to write into the podcast and tell me otherwise. But you'd have to be off your own back, go and seek out an organization that is then putting money in. There's no form of tax on the purchase of products that means that whether you like it or not, you're paying into a system. But most people I had that conversation with would be very happy to. So it's almost like, I think that there can be, sometimes we have to be careful of like pointing the finger at people who just enjoy hill walking or people who just enjoy kayaking, say, well, you're not paying into the system. We're like, well, how? Like, how do I pay in to protect these areas if there isn't a mechanism in place for me to put money in that direction? And I wonder how much resistance there really would be to it. And so from that, it seems strange to me that we're not further down the road of actually implementing that, especially in the States where there are, as you've already listed, a number of activities which already have a system in place for funneling funds into these great initiatives.
Yeah, I philosophically agree with you. And when we get down to the brass tacks of actually implementing these concepts, it gets really sticky really fast. And a lot of it is because of these recent tariffs. And so things are just getting more expensive. And what manufacturers have said is that any additional fees on top of that are going to, hamstring small businesses, for one, which the outdoor industry, even though we have so many hundreds of thousands of businesses, we are primarily made up of small businesses. So, I mean, you and I both know how tough it is to be a small business, and they've expressed that a lot of those fees are going to get pushed on to the consumer, which for some people is okay. If you think about the current sort of demographic, or at least before the last couple of years, it's generally white, middle-class people who can afford the extra couple bucks on the $500 backpack that they're already buying. But right now, we have a really fascinating thing happening in outdoor, which is especially exacerbated by COVID in this year, where we have a huge new wave of users and participants in the outdoor industry. And immediately issues of access and inequity just come right up, as, it's like already too expensive and determined to be sort of an elitist industry. And we're working really hard to fix that. But if you push more fees onto people buying things to get into it, then the barrier to entry gets even higher. And that's, I think, the number one thing that we really want to be avoiding.
Yeah, that is a really interesting dynamic. And the increase in people being interested in accessing, in whatever form that might be, outdoor spaces is amazing in one respect, because you hope that it means that they will then gain a greater appreciation for it and then want to protect it. But in another breath, that extra burden on the landscape from quite literally all of these extra feet on the ground, if there isn't the infrastructure in the place to cope with it, that in itself is a fundamental problem. And I know that we see that here on the west coast of Scotland, and we see it in the US, in the national parks, and we see it all around the world when it comes to the tourism, whether that be international tourism or indeed local tourism, of people visiting these more wild natural landscapes.
Yeah, and I 100% am of the position that it's not a problem of available area, but a problem of distribution. We have so many places for people to go. But, and Instagram has not helped this. You want to go to the place that everybody's going and take the selfie that everybody takes at Horseshoe Bend or whatever it is, but we have so much room to be spreading out on public lands throughout the U.S. And that's, an infrastructure issue, like you're saying. But one of the main things that is being talked about on the policy front this year with, this huge influx of investment with the Great American Outdoors Act being passed, and the Land and Water Conservation Fund being fully funded and reauthorized, there's a huge influx of resources coming towards outdoor recreation and public lands. And there's a bunch of recreation bills on the docket right now that are designed to help with some of these issues and be studying where people are going a little bit more, working on disbursement, like helping us not have such a devastating impact on, fewer places.
Yeah. I want to ask, the Great American Outdoors Act, I saw the build up to that as it was passing through the various stages to become enacted in law. For those people outside of the US, what is it and what does it mean?
So this is the largest investment in public lands in 100 years. It's the most.
So like since Teddy Roosevelt, basically.
Yeah. I mean, this is the biggest thing to happen since the trails in Yosemite were built. It's really amazing that it happened this year amidst everything else that is going on. It came as a shock to everybody that it got through. But people have been working on this for decades. I have some colleagues that have been working on LWCF for that long, if not longer. And it's massive. So it's, billions of dollars going into public lands over the next 5 years with the Great American Outdoors Act. And that's going to a lot of the deferred maintenance that we have on public lands and dilapidated infrastructure.
There's a huge backlog there, isn't there?
Huge, massive. So right now, all of the agencies are working on prioritizing which projects are getting done and securing the funding for the first year of it, which has been a pretty chaotic process. And then Land and Water Conservation Fund is $900 million a year in perpetuity that goes to both federal and state projects. So pretty just remarkable happening legislatively for anybody interested in recreation, hunting, fishing, what have you.
It's amazing. It's absolutely incredible. It's going to be fantastic to see as that rolls out now in the years to come what is done with that money. And I just the only fear that I have, and it's kind of a good fear to have, it's just because there's so much money involved, is that it's used wisely. Because it seems like these endless sums of money, but they soon disappear, and I worry sometimes when the numbers are so large that organizations can be a little frivolous with how they spend it. But the fact that there is so much money is a nice problem to have, I suppose. Yeah,
well, don't worry, Byron, because I'm on it. This is
you are.
Yeah, me and a whole army of other very passionate people. But my current work is with an organization called the Outdoor Recreation Roundtable, which is the voice for recreation on the national scale. And we represent all of the businesses in recreation through their trade associations, from diving to the American Horse Council to RV, boating, hunting, fishing, everybody you could think of. And so what we're working on right now is looking at all of these various projects that could happen through LWCF and investments with GAOA, and mapping them out to identify where we have the highest ROI for recreation as a whole. How we can benefit the most industries at once with these investments.
Oh, amazing. I didn't even ask that question because I thought that it was connected with your new work because I knew that we were going to get to that, but I didn't really know what it was that you were involved with. So it was almost like I planned that.
Yeah, seamless.
So I want to talk more on that. But so you were right, but I want to keep the timeline going for the people who are listening. So you ran this business that was focused on women in the outdoor space. But obviously that must have run its course because now you've got a new job.
Yes.
So what was how did that timeline work?
So my business started to be in flux end of last year and definitely beginning of this year. And it actually, there were a lot of things in play with that, which was just still being a very difficult startup, as most startups are, issues with my business partner. And then also I attribute some of my transition to just life stage. And I started the business when I was 27 and I was living out of a camper vehicle. And you can make any decisions you want when you have that little of overhead in your life. And now, I'm married and I'm in my 30s and I have shifting priorities. And so for a whole host of reasons, I started exploring other options amidst kind of the adversity that was happening in my business and certain things that were just kind of tying my hands a little bit. And I'm really consider myself really, really lucky to have gotten an opportunity to work with my friend and now boss, Jessica Wall, who I had known years before. We'd actually collaborated on a few projects within the Outdoor Industry Association where she positioned me as the first person to be talking about hunting in that professional space. So we've known each other for a while, and then she started working for the Outdoor Recreation Roundtable. At one point, she had me testify in front of Congress, which is various things I've ever done.
Hang on, pause there for a moment. So, what was that experience like, and what were you testifying for?
Oh my gosh, it was, Byron, it was that unhealthy fear. When you do something where you're like, okay, I got this, or then you do the type 2 fun stuff where you're like, well, that was scary, but I'm okay. And the plane ride going to DC when I was just stuck in my seat, I was like, this is full panic fear. I'm terrified. What am I doing? Had all those thoughts, but I was in the end very well prepared for this. She'd done a great job helping me write my testimony and kind of prepare for being in the hot seat for questions. But I ended up testifying in front of the Small Business Committee, which was the first time that the outdoor industry had been in front of the Small Business Committee, and was able to kind of talk about a lot of things we've talked about today, which is this growing influence of the industry, our connection to both small business, tax, workforce, but also public lands and conservation and habitat, and really trying to get different aspects of Congress to understand the complexities of our industry amidst the immense power that we're building at the same time. So it was cool. It was very scary, but
that's amazing.
It all worked out.
Well, I mean, with that as a baseline of experience with so many powerful people around you, I mean, everything after that's easy. Is it not?
It definitely set the bar for what type of public speaking freaks me out. I still, which is funny because I actually, a few weeks ago, I did a town hall with Senator Mitt Romney from my house here in Utah. And there were like 400 people on a Zoom call. And I was talking to the senator. And I got all of the physical debilitations that happen to you when you're public speaking. I was like, this is so bizarre because I'm alone in my house, but my pits are sweating and my heart rate is elevated. And I was like, I guess it doesn't matter if you're public speaking to just yourself. It's still scary. But, it definitely helped me develop some confidence and set the bar for what's truly terrifying in public speaking.
You keep on taking me by surprise. What on earth were you doing speaking with Mitt Romney? I've got to know.
Similar things. So the Utah has, and I think now 17 states in the U.S. have an Office of Outdoor Recreation That's usually part of the governor's office of economic development. And it's something that my current work kind of helps establish throughout the states. But if you think of us like the National Coalition for Recreation, the states all have their state version as well. And I was asked by the Utah office to speak in a town hall alongside the Office of Tourism to talk about recreation in the state and its economic presence.
That's pretty big.
It was fun.
Some heavy lifting.
Yeah. It was effective. I think I'm getting a little bit better at the Zoom environment.
Are you one of these people who do the Zoom with a different background behind you, like on the green screen?
No, I'm very meticulous about it, and my husband's desk is behind me, and I always clean up his desk and then like put a plant behind me and and kind of make my scene behind my screen.
I love it. Well, it's very rare that I have to do Zoom from time to time, but it's normally not for anything particularly important. But I do have a rather beautiful bookcase in my office now that's very well organized and sort of laid out. The only problem I have with it is it really depends on the audience, because if you were to look across my bookcase, like the bottom row is like every book that's probably ever been written on the history of bolt action rifles. And then the one above that is an entire shelf on ballistics and terminal ballistics. Then you get into more stuff that might be palatable for your average person. Like there's heaps of stuff on conservation in Africa and different parts of the world, conservation from different parts of the world, and then a lot of non-fiction stuff. But in amongst all of that is like little ornaments and skulls.
Oh, cool.
So there's sort of skulls. I mean, I love it. It looks very cool. But so I sometimes think of, when you watch it was very much a topic of conversation in the last 6 months, because all these news reporters and people who they were interviewing, they weren't in studios. They were all in their place, like you've described, at home on a Zoom call. And they all try and position it in a place that looks good. And very often, just I think mostly because they think it makes you look smart, is they position it with a bookcase behind you, which is why I sometimes use my bookcase, because hopefully it makes me look a little bit more intelligent than I am. And it was like, what books are on what books are on their shelves, and what does that say about you? And people were going into these massive rabbit holes about the types of books that were on people's bookshelves. If only they saw the skulls on mine.
I know. Well, it's funny. I'm sitting here, and my very first deer skull is on my desk next to me. So we have a little bit of the same vibe.
Good. Actually, this is completely off. It's kind of off topic. But someone was asking. I was having the dreaded, and I don't think we're going to get into this today, but I was having the dreaded sort of trophy hunting debate, and like, what is trophy hunting and what is a trophy? It was just with a friend of mine who's a gamekeeper up near where I live. I hadn't seen for a while. And he was asking me, well, do you keep stuff? Like, do you have skulls and stuff? I says, I do. But equally, I have like the skull of a hedgehog that I found dead on my bookshelf. I have the skull of a stoat, which I found dead. And I'm just fascinated by the structure, and I always have been since a little kid. I'm fascinated by the structure and form of skulls of wild things.
Yeah. I have this black baggie full of porcupine quills that I pulled off a dead porcupine a couple weeks ago. I agree with you. It's like this intimacy that you don't get otherwise. And I cherish it. I think it's one of the most beautiful parts about being able to see animals,
Absolutely. You've just reminded me, actually, I have a friend in Minnesota who has a porcupine skull for me in his freezer.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I know. And I've just remembered that it's there because it's going to take pride. When eventually I get it back, it's going to take pride of place in my skull collection. But there's another example. Like, I have no real connection to that skull other than it was sourced by a friend of mine.
Yeah.
But it has nothing to do with hunting other than I'm like fat. They're an incredible skull to look at. It's like one that a friend of mine in LA has one, is a beaver skull. Beaver skulls, and I really like beavers. So I don't know how I really feel about, although they are a legal species in some places to hunt. I don't know how I really feel about hunting them. I'm undecided yet. But yeah, I mean, their skulls are amazing.
Yeah, and then you get the teeth too.
I know. It's the teeth that make a squirrel. I have a squirrel, a red squirrel skull. Red squirrels are protected here, but I have a red squirrel skull because I found one dead on the road. And that's a really very cool skull as well. Anyway, we're getting off topic here.
Well, I mean, you're in good company, Byron, because I've still, for years, I'm like so you have a dead thing hotline in my friend group, and I was roadkill girl. Roadkill is like what actually got me into hunting, which we
really,
yeah. I mean, for a long time, I was a vegetarian, and then I started working on farms and being really involved with food in the permaculture days and getting acquainted with regional food systems. And then I was doing a bunch of like outdoor education stuff at the same time. And we would pick up roadkill to like place on trails with game cams, and then study scavenger succession with like groups of kids or whoever. And
cool.
Yeah, way cool. I mean, you could just
really cool. Was that part of the citizen science project?
No, this was when I was a naturalist and a teacher for 3rd through 8th graders for this kind of stuff for a chunk of time. And
that's freaking awesome. I love that.
It was so fun. And then sometimes, and then it's like you can save wings if you find birds and look at feathers and look at the difference between silent flight feathers and owls and louder feathers and hawks and stuff like that, or turkey vultures who have feathers designed to make noise so that when they land, they scare off anything else that's feeding on what they want to feed on. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah, you can see all that.
Every day is a school day.
Yeah, I mean, it's just endlessly fascinating, the little bits of evolution and specialization in the natural world. But sometimes the roadkill would be very fresh. And I got good at, with help, learning how to identify like whether something was safe to eat or not. So that's what got me into wild game. And
that's incredible.
Yeah. And pretty soon I started, and at the time I was raising animals for meat, like goats and ducks and stuff like that, and had like a little micro farm. And it was part of my sort of the culture of my community there too. So I was learning how to process animals and getting more acquainted with that very complicated task of taking a life in order for you to eat.
Yeah. So was this your transitioning from, I mean, what, just to backtrack a little bit, what had prompted you to become a vegetarian in the first place? Was it the not being particularly comfortable with the way and the life of animals as livestock before they become food?
Totally. I mean, I think I read The Jungle by Upton Sinclair in like the 6th grade, and that was the beginning of the end of meat for me. Just learning about the industrial food system and how horrific it is. And I think also at that time, like there was not widespread knowledge about organic food or natural food or antibiotics and hormones and meat. It was just a dumpster fire of terrible meat production. And so I was just like, I'm done here. Like I can't find anything that makes me
I'm out
comfortable, and then I was offered a burger from a farmer, a cattle rancher who was my neighbor. And it was just, that was the beginning of meat again for me. I was like, wow, this is an entirely different food.
Yeah.
See,
I find this fascinating because I think that this speaks a lot to this idea that we have, especially as hunters, but I would actually extend that to farmers who farm with a certain morality and are conscious about livestock and husbandry.
Yeah.
Is that we have so much more in common with people who make that kind of life choice and become vegetarians for those motives than we have differences. And I really despise this really hard line that's drawn and this them and us attitude, because one, it's not particularly constructive, but also I think that it completely ignores the possibilities for creating a far more diverse landscape, both for people and wildlife.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, there's so many ways in which ranching and farming actually improve the landscape, and there's some great articles in Modern Huntsman about that, regenerative grazing, and not all cattle are bad. It's definitely
Try and tell that to people, the way that all cattle have been alienated, in recent years. But yeah, you're right. That particular article that you're talking about, I think, was one that was done in conjunction with Epic about regenerative grazing, was fantastic. I love that kind of resource.
Yeah, and there's some really cool. A lot of this stuff has been like so neighbor to neighbor, and then the bigger a meat production company gets, the more complicated it gets. I think the harder it is to maintain quality and like truly healing food. But there's some cool examples out there. One of them that's recently on my radar is called Carter Country Meats, and they're like a fully grass-fed, grass-finished, family-owned and operated cattle ranch up in Wyoming. So it's regional for me here, and I've been really enjoying supplementing my own diet with that food and amazing meat in addition to wild game, because I don't hunt. I'm not a good enough hunter that I can have wild game for the entire year, at least yet, but I'm getting better. I'm getting very close. This is actually the first year that my husband and I both got deer in the same year. So right now is like the best our freezer has ever looked.
Awesome. I love it. So just tell me a little bit more about you've already given us quite a bit, but tell me a little bit more about the role and the job that you're in now. Just flesh that out a bit more for me, because it sounds fascinating. I don't know of a kind of an umbrella organization like that here where I live in the UK.
Yeah. Well, hopefully there's one before too long, because it's a brilliant concept that I didn't come up with. But several of the main leaders, I would consider them like maybe the first people who really worked and established the outdoor industry here and have built a ton of the infrastructure in the business community that we now get to experience, came together and said, we need to unify. We need to get together. We need to be going to Congress with an organized agenda, so that the hunters weren't coming at 10 o'clock and asking for this, and then the anglers weren't coming at 11 and asking for this, and then the climbers were coming at 12:30 and asking for this. And so there was a lot of, this was maybe a decade ago and has been developing since, but in kind of a two-way street, back from the administration and also from the business community, people saying like, hey, you need to pull together and get, more of a unified front. So the Outdoor Recreation Roundtable is that, and we represent all of the businesses and trade associations in the recreation industry. So we're the full breadth. I mean, it's like 5.2 million American jobs that we go and talk to Congress about and say, here's our value, here's what we're worth.
That's considerable. Because you're what, 340 odd or something million people in the US. So that's pretty. When you're explaining to me that the spectrum of industry involved, which is the full breadth by the sound of it, the first thing that springs to mind is I'm thinking, well, would that work here? I just can't see many of those, like the segments of the outdoor industry wanting to associate themselves in the same organization as any organization that has anything to do with hunting. Fishing, you might get away with it. There are some crossovers there that I've seen. But as soon as it has anything to do with killing of animals with a gun, we can't bow hunt here. I think most of them would say, I'm sorry, we're out. Was that do you know if that was I feel like it's less of an issue in the States, but do you know if that was a problem with some aspects of the outdoors community in the early stages of it?
I imagine it was. However, I think that the strength and the power of the common ground outweighed the differences. There are so many people, and I think the fact that it's the business community also sort of levels the playing field a little bit there too.
Okay, yeah.
It's not a coalition of conservation organizations. I think that would be far more difficult, especially for the reasons that you're talking about. It's not an ideology. It's
Absolutely
a technical thing. It's business. And so I think that helps. But also, so many of these people like go hunting, they have an RV, they have a 4-wheeler, they use a tent, they have the same boots that the backpacker has. Like when you start to peel back the layers, like it doesn't look all that different. Like the killing is the tough part. But I think we're, and that's part of our job, right, with Modern Huntsman, is like to continually humanize what hunting can be, and tell the real stories of how deeply ingrained in many beneficial aspects of wildlife and conservation it actually is.
That's incredible. So, I mean, I'm sure there's too many to mention, but what are a couple of the kind of major drives and initiatives that the organization is working towards right now? I mean, it must be a little strange right now with elections coming up in November, but...
Yeah, everything is strange right now. The big things for the year have been the Great American Outdoors Act and LWCF, as we've talked about, and now so much. I mean, I think we celebrated for about 20 minutes and then immediately pivoted towards all of the implementation work that is just, it kind of feels like, even though that was a mountain to climb, the hard work just began. So we've pivoted immediately into making sure that money gets rolled out in a way that has the highest recreation output, and just making sure kind of having some oversight as much as we can over what's happening with the different agencies. And we've been working really closely with the Forest Service to give feedback on behalf of the business community and help them understand what recreation needs are and what they look like. And it was a really cool year for that same relationship with COVID. There was a tremendous amount of collaboration between the federal agencies and the business community. And we ended up being on calls with them very frequently, trying to figure out how to reopen public lands safely, because it was this coordinated effort between the national parks and the guides and outfitters and the user groups, and, being able to educate and inform all those different players and say, here's what needs to happen so campgrounds can stay open for the rest of the summer and these businesses can stay in operation. So, and then, initially when there was a stimulus package that came out earlier this year that had the Paycheck Protection Program in it. And initially that didn't, the way you had to apply for it didn't work for seasonal businesses, which so many of the outdoor industry businesses are seasonal. So, this is probably getting a little wonky for everybody listening, but there's 1,000 little things like that where we're continually having to explain kind of how to best work with the recreation industry and make sure that we're taking care of it.
Yeah, no, but it's so fundamental. We had a very similar problem here with the stimulus package that was announced for businesses, and it excluded a lot of hunting operations.
Oh, wow.
What seems to be quite deliberately. I mean, they managed to fix it.
Yeah.
But it certainly in terms of the Scottish context, I have every confidence that it was fairly deliberate, because to fix it, it took weeks. Mm-hmm. And it was way longer than it needed to be. And at the same time as that was going on, there was push from temporary regulations for things that directly affect the hunting industry. They closed the season for burning heather, which is one of our management tools for grouse moors. I think it was a month early for absolutely, they'd already voluntarily stopped just in case there was an extra burden on the emergency services should something go wrong. Never mind the fact that it's normally the gamekeepers who are helping the emergency services when wildfires actually start, because they have the tools and actually more knowledge than the fire services of dealing with fires like that, because they do it on a yearly basis with their rotational burning. So they're always asked to come and help. But the Green Party pushed through this early restriction, and it really felt like it was just like a tester. It's like, can we get away with this? Yes, we can. Can we get away with not providing support for certain elements of the shooting community? Yes, we kind of did. It almost went under the radar, which is, I don't know, it's one of those frustrations that we seem to deal with here on a weekly basis almost.
It sounds like we need an international forum for outdoor recreation economies.
I would love it. I think that having, exactly as you outlined, having that weight behind you, which is the whole spectrum of the outdoors industry, all pushing forward for a common goal, makes a tremendous difference. It's so fragmented here. There's no cohesion whatsoever in the outdoors industry in the UK. And I think that's probably true actually in many parts of the world. And it would make a massive impact if there could be this much more collaborative approach, so that we can get the ear of government, because that's the biggest issue, is to actually get them to listen to you and then implement change that is positive for the outdoors community. Because so many of the, I increasingly feel like so many of the changes that are put in place, which may or may not be with the best intentions for conservation or environmental protection, completely neglect the people actually in the landscape and who want to use the landscape. And actually, then this goes to something that I write about in the next issue of the next issue of Modern Huntsman, Volume 6, which is this like the resilience of biodiversity, and what I believe is the need to reintegrate people within nature and not have this preservationist, isolationist view of that's nature over there, we're going to protect it and put the resources in to protect it. But hey, you as humans, you're not part of that, so don't go and interfere, which is where we seem to be going so often. It's extracting people. We talk about getting people connected with nature, but so many of the things that governments do don't speak to that.
Yeah, it's like, and so many ecosystems depend on a healthy amount of disturbance, right? And,
absolutely.
Yep. And without large animals doing that and moving seeds and dumping fertilizer, and without people doing small burns in the understory, like we're missing so much. Our ecologies are in a void for a lot of interaction. And so I agree with you completely that the keep people out mentality, it was reactionary when it happened, and it's caused a lot of damage in the health of ecosystems, especially I don't know a ton about Scotland, but in North America, it's just crazy. And yeah, that was a lot of what my article on wild boars and their role in Northern California ecosystem in Volume 3 was about, because they're looked at as this non-native nuisance, and they're way overpopulated, and they are causing a lot of damage. But if you looked at their disturbance in a smaller, if you got their numbers down in a way that their impact was lightened, then it actually mimics a lot of what grizzly bears and elk used to do in the ecosystem in California, who are both, no longer there. Really, there's some elk, but not from a functional perspective. So it's interesting to think about how, if we can't necessarily recreate the exact ecosystem that was there before by having the same numbers of wildlife or whatever, like how do we accept what kind of disturbance regimes are available to us now in order to make sure that things are getting germinated and propagated and intended to.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that one of the things that's been talked about off the back of the horrendous fires that, you guys have suffered this year. Well, I mean, not just North America, but up in the Arctic, and then last year in Australia, is really embracing the indigenous knowledge that exists within those ecosystems, and did operate very effectively for as a fire mitigation measure for thousands of years. And then, well, the basically European settlers put an end to that because they thought, oh, fire is bad.
Yeah. It's a really fascinating kind of rabbit hole to go down, because it wasn't until maybe 10 years ago that I learned that some seeds are only fire germinated, and you think about that just for a second, you're like, oh my God, these plants have evolved for thousands of years to depend on fire as a presence in the ecosystem, and we're cutting it out completely. And I was just in California recently, and my good friend Sashua, who was the photographer for that wild boar article in volume 3, he was looking back into some old books about indigenous people in California, and he found a segment that said, I don't know what the numbers are now for California, but at the time I was out there, it was about 3 million acres that had burned. And they estimated that that was the same amount of acreage that Native people used to burn annually in California. And of course, it wasn't these huge canopy fires. It was understory. It was more manageable. Smoke was more of a role in the upper canopy rather than flame. But it just hit me as like, wow, like the magnitude of what California is experiencing right now. It seems just completely devastating and outrageous. And it is, but it's actually like, given the scale, is completely horrible right now. But the amount of acreage is a historical part of the land management. And he was reading poems that mentioned smoke filling the river corridors as.
Oh, that's fascinating. I know. Yes, I've heard about this. It's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
And how it cooled the rivers when the fish were running.
Yes, exactly. And so, what's happening now is horrible, and I by no means am trying to minimize it, but there is an ancient relationship there that we need to figure out how to be, in harmony with again in some way, shape, or form. So the whole fire suppression management strategy is just, it's got to go. But hopefully some of this money from GAOA is going to go to deferred maintenance on public land. It's going to go to the Forest Service. They're going to be able to do, more of the work that they haven't been able to do. It's all part of where we're headed, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it just really speaks to this idea that reintegrating people where they can really help maintain these wild spaces, but they're wild spaces, but yet with the hand of humans.
Mm-hmm.
And utilizing, or I don't even think utilize is the right word, like embracing indigenous knowledge like they have there or in Australia is absolutely key. Like, it's crazy that hasn't been integrated with the science that we understand. We're only really talking about it now in the last 18 months.
Yeah. Well, and, it has to do with some of these very celebrated white colonial conservation figures in North America, like the John Muirs of the world. They walked into places like Yosemite Valley and said, look at this fertile wild land untouched by people, and really they were looking at the gardens of the native people there, of the Miwok. And it's just so ingrained in our early understanding of these places that they were a wilderness, and they weren't. They were very carefully, very intelligently managed landscapes.
Yeah. And I think just following on from that, a mindset that we need to get out of as humans when it comes to conservation is that we are not trying to establish this snapshot, this kind of portrait of what exists in continuation, because landscapes evolve and change.
Yeah. Yeah.
over time. And this idea that they can just be protected to exist as they exist now is not something that is sustainable in the long term.
Right.
That doesn't mean, but I say that at the same time as recognizing that is not making a case for the degradation of these environments and ecosystems,
Right.
but the fact that they are a dynamic system.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like the whole concept of native or non-native plants it's based on when white colonial settlers came to North America and said, here's when the time clock begins. And it's just it's not reality.
No. I wanted to ask you about, I think it was the first article that you wrote in Modern Huntsman, because it was focused on citizen science, which I actually wrote a piece about not that long ago in another publication. And it's something which I really wish more people would get involved in. And it's so easy to do. If you just go and Google citizen science and like the country that you're in, there'll probably be a dozen different ways that you can get involved. Everything from, fixing walkways and or counting butterflies or birds, or, in the UK, I think we have a bird survey that happens every year, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, is run by the RSPB, and they ask people, I think it's over a period of the same 2 or 3 days, so that they can try and work. I guess they have and they have an algorithm for working it out so that they don't get like cross counting between people. So over 2 or 3 days, all of these people who take part in it across the country at the same time are giving the numbers of birds on their feeders or in their garden. There's loads of things that you can do to contribute to citizen science, but you wrote a whole piece about this.
Yeah. In a life do-over scenario, I would be some type of research biologist. So for me, citizen science is like this way to fulfill the Team Zissou part of me that otherwise get to live out in the world. But I agree with you completely. It's such a cool thing to be a part of, and is tremendously contributing to tons of different research projects all around the world. It's cool to hear what you guys have going on there. But this one is called the Wasatch Mammal Watch Program, and it's designed by a PhD student here called Austin Green at the University of Utah, and he partnered with all the different agencies here and a couple of nonprofits to set up a widespread camera trap survey for mostly large mammals in the Wasatch Mountains of Utah, which run kind of north-south along the valley, the Salt Lake Valley. And interestingly enough, that wildlife-urban interface is the densest in the country, and it's also the most highly visited national forest in the country. And it sees millions of more people than all 5 national parks in Utah combined. So we have this really important ecosystem. It supplies all the water to the people of Salt Lake, and yet there's intense visitation and habitat pressure. So there's a group of us that monitor collectively over 200 cameras throughout the summer season. And one of the, I think, most impactful aspects of it is that cameras are able, it's like the game cams that hunters use that take photos with either heat or motion sensor. And you can get 24 hours of data, where if you're just a researcher, you get the snapshot that you were able to see with your clipboard while you were standing there at your research plot or whatever it was. So you're able to get like incredible depth. And we monitored the entire range, and now it's its 3rd year. We just completed the field season, and it's the most successful citizen science project on record now. So
wow.
Yeah, really cool that it's been so widely celebrated, and the data has been picked up by so many of the agents, the Department of Transportation and the Department of Wildlife here, because they're trying to figure out how to develop wildlife corridors in the area, how to manage housing development, and then really measure the disturbance of people on animals. And what they're finding is so fascinating. The whole one of the concepts coming out of it is that wildlife in this area has what's called a weekend effect, which means have certain behaviors Monday through Friday, and then on the weekends when people are flooding the trails, they have an entirely different behavior pattern, which causes overlap in species that didn't have it before. It shortens hunting hours for top predators. All sorts of strange and very important effects are being measured. But one of my biggest takeaways from being a part of it, and one of the things I try and share with people, because I think it's critical and also really relatable, is that this disturbance and these behavior changes are happening with wildlife, whether you're hunting or not. It's the same thing is happening if you're skiing, if you're hiking, if you're gabbing on the trail with your friends. You're causing this impact. And I think so often we look at hunters and anglers as takers in the landscape, even though 99% of the time we're just hikers with weapons. But it for me started to level that conversation a little bit more by saying like, hey, we need to, all recreationalists, we need to look at our impact, whether we're a hunter or a hiker or not.
Yeah, and it's so true. I know that there's some preliminary research that has been done over this period of global lockdown in some countries, which is how, well, firstly, how are animals reacting to the fact that no one has been around? And then as lockdown started to lift, because, and this goes to something we started talking about at the beginning of the podcast, was more people were accessing these trails and more remote and wild spaces. And so there was actually no weekend effect because no one was at work. And they were accessing these places in greater densities throughout the entire week. And how was that affecting wildlife? And it's really interesting to see these dynamics and understand them as importantly.
Yeah. But I mean, I would absolutely encourage everybody in their area to Google citizen science and figure out what they can get involved in, because it just gives you such purpose in your place, and you get to meet really cool people, and I think immediately get engaged with what's happening in your area and learn from usually like amazing regional experts about your ecosystem. But yeah, there's a lot of cool projects to be a part of now. I think it's becoming more and more popular. And I think, the funding is coming down the pipe for these projects too, as the research is more and more impactful.
One of the projects that we have ongoing, which is specifically for people who shoot, it's collated. I'm not sure who does the analysis, but it's certainly collated by the British Association for Shooting and Conservation. And you send in, throughout the wildfowling season, you send in the wings of birds that you've hunted.
Oh, very.
And I think that there's particular species that they're interested in more than others. And they're able to do genetic sampling on them and look at the crossovers in populations and in which parts of the world they overwinter from and are coming here. And it's a really good way of essentially using the byproduct of food to learn more and contribute to the conservation of these species going forward, which is something which we talk about it a lot as people who hunt and people who fish, but beyond, like if you're in the States, beyond paying your compulsory tax, which then might be used for some conservation project, most of us probably don't physically contribute to any kind of research that is facilitating the scientific knowledge of conservation. And this is a great example of something that you can do very easily just by taking the wings off, sticking them in a packet, and sending them to the address that's on the website.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I think that's one of the debilitating aspects of wildlife management and conservation here among hunters, is they think, oh, well, I paid my excise tax with my license and, the fees on my ammo and tackle, but it's not enough. It's really not.
Yeah. What are you actually contributing beyond what you have no choice to contribute?
Right. Yeah. I mean, the same argument could be said where you're like, oh, I support bridges because I paid my taxes this year.
Yeah, no, exactly. American Prairie Reserve. This is something I wanted to, I'm conscious of. I don't know how on earth we've been talking for an hour and 15 minutes, but we have. American Prairie Reserve, I wanted to ask you about this because there was another article that you wrote, and I have to say that, like, and until I think I was sitting in Montana with Tyler when I possibly did a first edit of that. It was the first time that I was aware of the American Prairie Reserve. I didn't know anything about it before that. Explain what it is for people.
Oh, so it's amazing. It's also new to my radar in the last couple of years since being able to work on this project. But it is a nonprofit based in northern Montana, and it is a group of people that have begun. Well, they've been working on it for quite some time now, but the grasslands were identified as being one of the most underpreserved ecosystems in the world. And when that research came out, people started to strategically look at which areas of the world had the highest potential for reestablishing sort of the northern Great Plains ecosystem. And based on existing native grassland, meaning like unaffected by agriculture, other sort of national monuments and protected land, and also the areas protected by native reservations. This area around the Missouri Breaks in Montana was identified, so that's where people dug their heels in and started to do this work. But it's a mosaic project now where they're strategically buying land and stitching it together in order to create a 3 million acre preserve. And they've reintroduced bison to the landscape and other wildlife in order to recreate this northern Great Plains ecosystem.
So who funds it? Because it's privately owned then, essentially, is it?
Yeah, it's privately owned, so it's donors and I think grants as well.
Wow, okay. And are they putting a fence around it, or is there a free flow of game populations and species between areas which are now the American Prairie Reserve and whatever is neighboring them?
Yeah, so there's, I think there's a combination of all of the above. They have certain fences for the bison.
Of course, yeah.
And then they have other fences so that, the pronghorn can move. I forget the details, but it's like if a wire is a certain height, then the pronghorn can get through, but the mule deer can't, or vice versa. So they have this mathematical perfection with how they do some fencing in order to let certain species migrate and others not. And then a lot of it is open. I mean, a couple of the things that make this conservation effort really stand out is that, one, it's private land, but it's all passable to get to public land. So there's absolutely no land locking that happens as a part of this project. And two is that hunting is a fundamental aspect of their ethos around how this land should be managed and how people should have a relationship to it. So it's open to the public for hunting.
That's amazing. So it's being viewed as active management.
Yeah. And Montana, when you get into the hunting regulations, technically it's block management. Yeah, which means you just have to have. It means the owner can, in partnership with the Department of Wildlife, sort of decide how many species should go from the land that year.
That's fascinating. And you had the opportunity to go and hunt there. How does that system actually work? Because I know on your public lands, you go to a public office or you apply online and you get your over-the-counter tag. So how do you get permission to go and hunt on what is essentially private land? Yeah,
so you get your tag and your license the same way you would in any state. And then I was just actually reading up on this week and refreshing myself because I want to go back next year. There's a certain date where you have to call and make a reservation. So you don't miss that date on your calendar, which is, I think, the same thing. Utah's not a block management state, so I don't know how this works in other states. It's probably different everywhere, but I know that's the same for other places in Montana where it's like, it's block management. I have a general tag for that region. And then I call and reserve days that I want to go hunting there, of which they're limited. So it's not a free for all.
And has there been any resistance to this sort of series of buy-ups, essentially? Because it feels like something that some people might object to.
Highly controversial. Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, as you're driving in, there's all sorts of signs that say, "Save the cowboy, stop the American Prairie Reserve." And
is this because they've been buying up small ranches that would have been traditionally sort of small family-owned ranches?
Yeah, I think there's a sizable amount of resistance to the concept of people from out of state buying and privatizing land, for good reason. Like that's a scary thing. You have a lot of power when you have land, and especially when it's in such quantities. But in all the conversations that I've had, the perspective that I've come to is that, a lot of these families and people that have ranching heritage up there were, the first folks to sort of settle in that area. There's absolutely the mentality of, we came and we tamed this place. We got rid of the beasts that ran through it. We turned it into productive agriculture in a place that could sustain us and feed us. And we served the people and the community by doing so. And this tremendous accomplishment that this landscape is now a grain producing
conquered, basically.
Yeah, exactly. But there's so much pride in that. It's completely ingrained in the American cowboy mentality. And
I get that. I do get that. Yeah, I understand it.
I have empathy around it for sure. So the concept of a group of people who are going to reverse all that by putting those species back, actually letting the land go feral, encouraging the grasslands to take over again is, it's in opposition to, I think, a lot of their fundamental beliefs about what's right or wrong for that area.
Yeah, but I suppose, I don't know how the land buy-ups work, but you can't buy something that's privately owned unless it is on the market, or if you approach someone and say, hey, here's a sum of money, would you like to sell? They can't force, because it's not government-owned.
Correct. Yeah.
This isn't like a country in Central Africa where the government just comes and takes your land, even if it's under private ownership.
Right.
This has to be by by mutual discussion and agreement.
Yep. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It has to be offered up or for sale in the first place.
There must be a reason why people want to sell their small holding or their farm in the first place. So, but I can see how the remaining ranches, as they see this landscape changing around them, most people don't like change, and change can feel very uncomfortable. I suppose the risk that sits, or I would be concerned with, is, as it stands right now, and maybe you're going to tell me something about the sort of the fundamental tenets that they write into the ownership, but it could be purchased with all of these amazing intentions right now, and it sounds so idyllic and amazing in this process of active management, and people can essentially use these sustainable wild resources, and it sounds brilliant. But at some point in the future, they could change their mind as to what they use this land for. Is there anything to stop them doing that?
Yeah, it's interesting. And I listened to a lengthy podcast from the founder, kind of talk about his answer to this question, because I have the same concern. It's like anybody's mission can change at any moment, and then what? So how we typically have defense in those scenarios is with land trusts and conservation easements and ways of putting land into determined, protected designations to keep that sort of stuff from happening. And the perspective of the, I'm forgetting his name right now, but people can look it up, but the main guy for the APR, he was saying that he's all about those protections, but most of them are outdated. Most of them they're not going to change and adapt to the modern or most innovative grazing practices that are available to us now. They're based on what we knew 50 years ago. And he wanted to be able to continually be innovating on the best land management practices available rather than be beholden to, let's say, the Department of Wildlife of Montana and their view of how bison should be on the landscape. So, I mean, there's certainly an element of like, you have to trust these people. And
I was going to say there's trust involved in this, but they want to embrace adaptive change with the best interest of the land at heart. I suppose the argument there would be, okay, well, it's in the best interest of the land and the wildlife and the ecosystem, but isn't in the best interest of the people who live there. And I suppose that might be some of the resistance that continues.
Yeah, and I think,
I'm thinking jobs.
Yeah, and I don't know enough about the economy of the surrounding farms and ranches to the APR to speak to that, but I know that a lot of small scale agriculture is really struggling, and that industry is going away to a certain degree. So my guess is that it wasn't very economical in the first place.
Yeah. Now that's true of so much. I mean, there's a lot of farming here in Scotland which would not be economical if it wasn't without government subsidies. And then you have to ask the question, is this really the best use of the land? Or should we be using that land in a different way that does actually make economic sense? And maybe it will encourage or force us to embrace a use which is more sympathetic to the landscape for a start, but also makes us use sustainable wild resources, like replacing sheep with deer. Or that's we're not going to get into it, but that would be a very controversial statement here, because we're trying to the government are trying to reduce deer populations. But sheep are mouths on the land as well. They graze basically the same stuff, and we have about the same amount of sheep as we have deer, currently speaking. But there's plenty of research to suggest that in those very harsh environments, you get far better conversion to protein if you have deer on the landscape.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And I mean, the same is true of changing agricultural practices and putting different types of breeds of cattle or sheep or other livestock on the land and managing them in a different system, so that it's more in harmony with the natural processes that would be there, rather than this kind of monoculture landscape where it's all just grass fields that are grazed incredibly heavily. I think there's a lot of progress to be made there. And just going back to something we touched on sort of halfway through the show, I think that you brought up, is that I think we have a lot to learn about not completely changing our systems before we fully understand what the implications are going to be, because we know that with the right mechanisms and the right planning in place, that lower density grazing of cattle in certain environments can actually be beneficial for those ecosystems. Whereas most of the public, if you were to ask them about cattle now, they would only say negative things about it.
Right. Yeah. And you have such great topics on this podcast. It made me think of your recent episode with the carbon sequestration.
With the trees. Yeah, it was fascinating.
Have the best intentions, and yet, we'll have so much to learn about how the ecosystem actually responds to things.
Lindsey, it's been incredible to speak to you. I would quite happily do another podcast with you for exactly the same length of time, but I don't want to hold you up anymore. It's also midnight here, so I suppose I need to go home at some point. But that's absolutely not a problem. I'm not complaining. This is just this is a function of having a global podcast, and so many listeners in America, and so many friends and contacts I have in the States, and then and other parts of the world in completely different time zones to me. I don't mind whatsoever. It's been amazing to have you on today. I just wish that I should have been in the States about this time hunting with my friends, and it would have been awesome to do that with you, but COVID-19 and all that.
Well, we can meet up on the APR for a mule deer hunt next fall. How about that?
That sounds like a deal. I'm going to hold you to that.
Okay. Well, planning starts now, but yeah, Byron, thank you.
Okay.
Really a treat to be on here amidst all the other fabulous guests that you have. And I appreciate you burning the midnight oil to have this conversation.
Well, I massively appreciate your time. Thank you very much, Lindsey.
Thanks, Byron.